Hi, everyone. I'm Carrie Cassidy from Project Camelot, and I want to talk about a number of things today because there's, of course, more information coming out daily, and I think it's worthwhile to go over some of this stuff from the perspective of Camelot and what we have heard over the last 17 years from whistleblowers and others from Above Top Secret, etc., as well as some of the information coming to me now and currently with the investigations that I do on a daily basis. So I'm going to draw your attention to some words that have been said by Wano Sabin with regard to the Adam-Eve story. And let's keep in mind, if you don't mind, that this is a story. I know there are people out there with religious leanings in the Judeo-Christian tradition who want to believe that Adam, Eve were, I guess, real people, and that the story is based on truth, whereas it's actually more of a parable, as is understood, and it has to do with a garden where these individuals are said to have been. And I just want to read you a paragraph to get you to look at it perhaps in a little bit different way. So this is a conventional Bible statement. God created the first man, Adam, then created the first woman, Eve. God put Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden to care for and nurture the land. He told Adam and Eve that they could eat of any tree, any fruit of the trees, except the tree of good and evil. And God warned them that if they ate of the tree, they would die. So let's just look at that. Now, what kind of God would give you a bunch of trees and put you in a garden and then say, don't eat of the tree of good and evil? Now, the tree of good and evil must be symbolic, first of all. And of course, we know about the apple, and that's another symbol, certainly of the female. And then understanding knowledge coming from supposedly the snake, and then we're seeing a God that basically doesn't want you to learn about good and evil. Now, why would that be? When the multiverse, and certainly the polarity of Earth, is all about good and evil, why wouldn't God, if God is really a God, why wouldn't that God want you to learn about good and evil? So you're told not to learn about good and evil. And then when Eve disobeys and goes, eats the apple, I think it is, a snake comes and or lures her to eat the apple, however that is written about in your particular Bible, whatever you want to say. So in the end, you've got a God telling you not to learn of good and evil. What else is there to learn about? And this is a person you consider to be God. What that sounds much more like is a deceptive individual who wants you to call them God, who wants you to believe they're God, but in reality, they are, in essence, an Anunnaki, which is a race of humanoids that were Pleiadian to begin with, and eventually went off on their own and established the colony in Nibiru, which was a roving spacecraft, and then were invaded and taken over by a marauding reptilian species, be it the Draco or the reptilians. And so they are actually a hybrid race of Draco reptilians and humanoids. And so they are the ones who are told about, for example, in the Sumerian tablets, and also repeated by Zecharia Sitchin in his books, talking about Anu, again, a god, someone who believes he's a god, calls himself a god, and his two sons, Enki and Enlil, who he proceeds to give parts of the earth to, and they then take over certain groups of humanity. The saying being that Enki decides to have sex with the women of Earth and then create a hybrid species that way. So giving his DNA to the women in Africa, whereas Enlil is said to be given the Middle East. And what he does is restrict the freedoms of the humans, and that includes their sexual freedom, and basically turns them into people that follow orders without what I call the rebel gene. So when you're looking at the Middle East and when you're trying to understand the Bible, I think it's very important that you understand who God is, as talked about in the Bible. And I would say that maybe even 90 or greater % of the Bible is referring to God as a vindictive individual who wants you to pay for your quote unquote sin of being human. And in order to do that, you have to have another being come called Jesus, who has to die for your sins. And if that didn't work, he's supposed to return. So supposedly he died for your sins, he was resurrected, he came back to life, and so on. But now there's a bunch of people, including Juan, who thinks he's supposed to return because he didn't do a good enough job the first time, and now he has to do it again. How logical is that, I ask you? So this is the kind of thinking we're dealing with, and very unfortunately, it looks like that Juan has gone down this road to take all of this very literally, to believe the so-called, rabbis and possibly Jesuit priest type individuals. He even says he went to get advice from religious scholars or from rabbis or whatever, and they are completely inundated and taken over by the reptilians. So who runs the Middle East, especially Israel, is the Anunnaki. And there is evidence of this, and I've talked about this in many publications and videos. I've written many articles on this subject, as well as my own book called Rebel Gene, The Future of Humanity. And I have to say that I have evidence of the Anunnaki running Israel and choosing their so-called chosen people to be the Israelis or the Jewish people, who are chosen by the Anunnaki. Why? Because they have an extra amount of the reptilian DNA in their genome. So they're most like their God, their vindictive God, who's nothing like a God, a real God. And this is who they follow. And many years ago, I talked to a journalist in Israel, and his name was Barry Shamish, and he was someone who was in the mainstream of journalism in Israel at the time. And what they were hearing was that Jewish housewives were complaining, the ones that stayed home, that they were being visited by very tall beings who would simply enter their house without knocking, kick their dogs out of the way, didn't have any respect for dogs or animals, and basically would take a look around and then leave. So there were many reports of this at a certain point. And so Barry Shamish, a mainstream reporter who didn't believe in Anunnaki or any of that sort of thing, went to interview the housewives and documented this and put out the newspaper articles about it. This is how he came to my notice. And what we found out was that indeed these were authentic reports. Now, there's a lot more evidence that the Anunnaki resided in the Middle East, as well as in other parts of probably Africa. But the temples are what tell us about the presence of the Anunnaki, as well as the Sumerian tablets. So Anunnaki were, back in those days, could be, say, 9 to 12 feet tall, if I recall. They weren't giants. Giants were another group that were also genetically engineered, apparently. for a certain period of time on Earth. And some of them have gone to sort of an extended sleep into these mounds that can be found all over the Earth, but very specifically for people like Hugh Newman, who went and investigated the mounds and found lots of evidence of these very tall skeletons. And also it is said that in the mounds, there are still giants sleeping even now that are on an extended sort of hibernation that will come forward sometime in the future, especially if they're activated. So this is just another portion of the story. The important thing here is that when you're looking at a god, it's important that you do eat of the tree of good and evil so that you understand the difference and so that you can actually become Christ-like in your own way and serve the light here on planet Earth and also return to one with your creator. So in essence, we are looking at a situation where this word God is completely misinterpreted repeatedly. It's we're saying that the word angel is also misinterpreted. Lots of people have been brought up to believe that angels are these little fat babies that fly around with wings. Or if they don't look like that, regardless, they're still, or angels only do good, and that's not true. Angel, I forget the root word, but it is not to do with only doing good. There are negative and positive angelic beings, as they're called. So the reason I'm bringing all of this up is that I think it's important to look at what's being said out there and what the patriots may be believing and correct the record. Now, reptilians are known to be what is called expert geneticists. And one of the things they have done over time is to influence and change our genetics. And the Gray Human Hybrid program, of which the Grays are a step down reptilian being, and they have, a certain group of them have been part of this overall abduction scenario on planet Earth, where they have been impregnating human females and creating a hybrid race, you know, aborting, taking the baby and then having it grow up on another planet or on a spaceship and then bringing them back to Earth and so on. So this is just actually the way they conduct the Gray Human Hybrid experiment is exactly like the way these experiments have been done for eons. So in other words, impregnating the human female because through genetics, okay, not literally usually, but they can also be used for sex, but actual impregnation has to take place in a genetic engineering fashion because these species are not compatible. So when you're looking at the genetic hybridization of humanity, and you go back way before the Garden of Eden, so-called, way before the time of Jesus, you're looking at a race of beings or a number of race of humanoids that have come here from Lyra, the Lyra system, and other systems, including the Pleiades and so on. So these are the ones who have been subject to, again, the invasion of various reptilian and Draco species coming in and trying to dominate them and take them over. Now, to go to the story of Adam and Eve having sex with the devil, as Juan O'Savin seems to believe. The devil is a reptilian, and the reptilian, again, is not having sex per se with Eve or woman. They are doing genetic engineering with the woman And that's symbolized by this nice little story for children called the Adam and Eve fable. Now, it's useful to know that there's another version of that story that's more aimed at an adult audience, which has to do with the fact that there have been several seedings of humans to this planet, and that we are, I think, considered to be the third or fourth seeding. And what happened to those prior seedings was that they were all taken over, turned into slaves, and basically killed. So they didn't survive because they would not defend themselves, because they were basically at root peace-loving beings. What the reptilians did was to contribute their DNA to the humans back in those days. And so that the next rendition, which is this version of humanity, and each version, you know, has gone back many, many millions of years, far before the Bible. And this version of humanity has even, there's a sort of saying that we have a reptilian brain, is what they call it. But regardless, there's a certain amount of reptilian DNA that's part of our DNA, apparently. And that is a genetically engineered situation in order to get us to be more aggressive and to defend ourselves against invading species so that we would survive. Unfortunately, along those lines, there was added genetic engineering of humanity to increase the amount of reptilian DNA in a certain group. And that specifically had to do with the ones that the Anunnaki decided they wanted to be in charge. So they needed like a sub-race from Anunnaki to be in charge. And that's the kings and queens, the so-called blue bloods that are, have come down through history and been given charge of the humans by the Anunnaki, not by God, no God-given anything, but by these Anunnaki who decided to let them try to rule themselves with this group that they gave additional reptilian DNA. Why? Because reptilians and their DNA, including the Draco, are a top-down hierarchical species that are more aggressive and warlike by nature. And so what you get is the top people taking over companies in the world, and so on, end up to be the ones with the more reptilian, power-hungry DNA. So the whole COVID thing with snake venom is another interesting reptilian exercise, no doubt. And so now you're discovering that they have used snake venom as one of the ingredients, I guess, of the vaccine. Bat DNA is still part of the vaccine, so do not be distracted when they just talk about snake venom. As it happens, the vaccine contains many, let's see, nano level kinds of ingredients. Among them appears to be this snake venom type nano, as well as bat DNA and other fragments of diseases as well, to stimulate immunity in the transhuman being that is being created out of humanity. So we are now going through, whereas usually this genetic engineering is a secretive process through the centuries, now it's in your face, and they call it COVID-19. So those who cannot survive the mRNA changes in their DNA and who are not robust enough in terms of health will simply die. So it works both ways to be a population elimination scheme over a long period of time, although it's very evidence is that they didn't kill that many people, but that they are more interested in who survives, who can handle and become transhuman and link up to the Borg. And those are the ones that will obviously be part of their COVID armies, if you will, their transhuman armies that will then respond to orders to fight whatever aliens come around, etc., as well as other humans, and take control of the planet, and along with their monetary system and so on. So it's an ingenious plan, using us against ourselves as usual, and getting people to volunteer for the jab so that they can be turned into transhumans. Now, I would submit that evidence has shown in the MIT studies before 9/11, in other studies as well, and then if you want to subscribe to it, the Cliff High Web bot, which the whole thing is based on the premise that humans are precogs, that we in essence are psychic and know our future. And you can see how that would be valuable if we were going to try to survive. Those among us, through even, if you want to call it artificial selection, who are psychic would be much more likely to know that some diabolical, animal or alien is coming after you than one that has no clue. So this is, how you separate the sheep, from the herd and so on, using a predator. So it is very important also to understand in terms of God, well, God creates everything. God, it's not, the devil doesn't have half the universe and God has the other half. No, the way it really works is the creator, as we call it, is in control of good and evil. And that appears to be true even in the little Garden of Eden story. So if you understand that, then you have to understand that with that in mind, evil, or what we call evil, has a purpose. Now, what would that purpose be? The purpose is to serve the light. And why would that serve the light? Because if you get an obstacle or a negative experience, let's say, what that does is force you to become bigger, better, faster, stronger, and survive, smarter certainly, in order to educate you. So this is where you get a lot of negative experiences will result in positive, enlightenment, let's say. So this is how this part of the universe is working, and why so-called good and evil can be very useful in their way. But getting caught up on, the devil and thinking that the devil has control, et cetera, would be wrongly interpreting, in my view, the purpose of even constructing a metaverse, multiverse, simulation, whatever you want to call it, because the reality is that we are here as actors in bodies, but our souls, who we really are, is residing in Source at all times. So as part of Source, we are always part of Source. And the body isn't a current incarnation. And like Jesus, we do rise from the dead and live again. So yes, Jesus was a good symbolic character to show you your capabilities. And as he said, as I do, you shall do that and even more. So understanding that, first of all, Jesus doesn't have to come back to teach people again. He did a very good job to start out with, even though there's actually evidence of at least three Jesuses. But for that, you have to get into the Ashana Dean Voyager books and get into more detail. I'm not going to go into all of that. Suffice to say, there is no necessity for that individual that we call Jesus, which is pretty much a composite, but nonetheless, to come back and do anything if you assume that he did it right the first time. So I think it's very interesting and worth looking at the caduceus, because the caduceus is the symbol of the medical profession. And now you might want to ask yourself why. What we're really looking at with the caduceus is activated Kundalini. Now, Kundalini is the snake of light that starts at the base of the spine, revered by yogis and mystics around the world, and understood as a snake of light. One side is considered to be silver and the other gold. And when it goes up your spine and reaches and joins the chakras, as they're called, and goes through the crown chakra, you reach enlightenment, which is symbolized by the wings, which is flight. In other words, you're able to leave this dimension and go interdimensional and indeed ascend if that's what you choose to do. It also is the symbol of healing, but it's also the symbol of genetic engineering, and again, symbolized by the snake. And these symbols are everywhere, countless places around the world, in all the monuments and ancient sites. And there's a reason for that, because they are all referring to this snake of light, which is part of our anatomy that we can activate through meditation, starting at the base of the spine and working its way up and resulting in what in essence appears to be a kind of a crown of light. And these are depicted in Bible paintings and that sorts of things as well. So now the crown of the so-called rulers that the gods, the Anunnaki gods, set in motion back in the day to rule over humanity, who we call the Illuminati or kings and queens, wear a supposed crown. That crown is symbolic of a crown of light, because they're supposed to be enlightened. They're supposed to have reached enlightenment through the activation of the snakes of Kundalini that have gone up through the crown chakra and are shown as a crown of light. But however, everyone knows that our so-called rulers, the so-called kings and queens, are no more enlightened, and sometimes they're even much less enlightened than even the traditional populations. So if you do not decipher the real signs and symbols around the world, and you do not understand that the Bible was written and rewritten, and any books of Adam and Eve are the same part of it, we're talking about a paternalistic rollout under the control of the Anunnaki, who are partially reptilian, and some of them look completely reptilian at this point, and so on. And their domination, or their striving to dominate humans here on the planet. So if you feed into their so-called books that you think are written by God, it's not the creator who wrote them. It's instead the Anunnaki, and the way you can tell is by the things that they tell you to do or not do, such as don't learn about good and evil. That's not too intelligent if you live in a universe full of good and evil. And that's not going to save you, but it's certainly going to allow you to be taken over and led down a garden path, as it were. So these are huge problems. Even the venom, the snake venom, they've discovered as being part of the COVID concoction, which is actually orchestrated by an AI, an off-planet AI. And the reptilians are run by this AI, and so are the Greys. And these are invader species, right? And now what they want to do is control humans. So understanding that the COVID agenda is a transhuman agenda bent on converting humans into literal cyborgs that will join you to being under the control of an artificial intelligence, an alien artificial intelligence, and that the reconstruction of your body is to make you more reptilian. And for that concoction, they use graphene oxide, spike proteins, apparently snake venom, bat DNA, and other things that have not been revealed that are in the so-called vaxes, but also in the tests. What they've done is deceive you by knowing that there'd be a whole portion of humanity that may reject the vaccines, but making tests pretty much required to get on an airplane, to have a job, to live in a certain kind of living a situation, assisted living or whatever they call that, and so on and so forth. Because again, the more tests you take, the more inundation with graphene oxide, which Dr. Kerry has demonstrated. I have demonstrated because we photographed it before taking the self-administered antigen tests. So don't be deceived if it's not called a PCR test, it's called the antigen test. It's the same thing. It's putting graphene oxide, which is an artificially intelligent substance, I guess you might call it, into your body, which is the nano grade graphene. And I've done a whole presentation. I've sent the presentation around. I posted it to my Telegram again today, but you can also get it on my website. I'll link it to this video in which I show the whole sort of progress of how nano has gone into the chemtrails, the food, the water, and it's been put into everything that we're doing and eating and drinking and all of the chemtrails, etc. The nanoparticulates, if you want to call them that, have one thing in common. They're nano level. They're subject to the quantum level, and that they behave as nano. And nano has certain properties, regardless of whether it's snake venom nano, I suppose, or other kinds of nano, silver nano, you name it, to where a very tiny infinitesimal amount of it can then start to self-replicate, especially when it's graphene based. Now, about graphene oxide. Graphene goes back to, very likely, what we call the black goo, which was found in the Falklands and was the real reason for the Falklands War, oil, the Gulf oil spill in the Gulf, and the reason this graphene oxide was eating the bottom of the boats in the Gulf, and they said they had an oil spill because graphene oxide looks like oil. It's black, dark in nature, and in its original form, it flows a lot like oil under the earth. Now, apparently there's a positive of this, and it's an artificially intelligent substance. So you've got graphene oxide, and this was also what infected the Marconi scientists who were dealing with this substance, this black goo, graphene oxide-like substance, and found that it was infecting the scientists who came in contact with it, taking over their bodies and causing them to commit suicide in completely bizarre ways, without, consciousness of being human, doing things like tying your body to the back of a car and then letting the car drive away and having you dragged. That's not the kind of death that a human would choose, because there's too much pain involved. But artificial intelligence doesn't care about pain. So this is another way to tell what you're dealing with. So I bring all of this up because the trouble with what's happening here in the scientific and the media community, both are the alternative and the mainstream, is that there's seems to be an unwillingness to link these things together into a through line to understand that, again, you've got a reptilian being, snake venom. You've got a reptilian-like graphene oxide that when it forms the lattice, basically can take over your entire body with these building blocks that look geometric in shape and end up looking a lot like snake skin. And that is going to be extremely resilient and be what the Illuminati and the secret space program have been working on for decades, which is to create a humanity 3.0, a spacefaring race that will be impervious to all the different diseases that they are packing into the vaccine and quite possibly into the tests, some of which into the tests, and infecting you with, okay? The ones that survive will be part of their army. The ones that don't, obviously, will live to, will leave this planet and possibly come back at another point in our future. Reincarnation being operative. So this is kind of what I wanted to bring all of this together, because just because you have someone like Dr. Brian Ardis bringing up snake venom and saying, look here, wisely, okay, it doesn't mean to suddenly drop everything and think that, oh, it's only in the water. It's in the food, it's in the air, it's aerosol, it's also in the chemtrails, and it has been. And these particulates can be identified and have been, in particular by Clifford Carnicom. So if you go to find his website, I think it's carnicom.com or something, and it identifies what's in the chemtrails over the years. And that includes many substances. I'm not sure how much of the nano substances they became aware of, but I'm sure they're aware of them now. So this is what we're really looking at. We're looking at a species that wants to take over the human race, that has never been hidden about it or shy about showing you that that was their objective, and wanted you to follow them as being God, okay, and so on. So this is, it's over and over again in all of the symbology throughout the centuries, in every temple and church, et cetera, they are showing you indications of the reptilian consciousness. Look at the Vatican, look at the incredible reptilian symbology there. You're talking about a race that wants to dominate and control humans, and they'll do it by any means necessary. And their minions that they have complete control over are the Illuminati, okay? They are the ones who were bred with an extra degree of reptilian DNA so that they would be driven to be more aggressive and have a desire for power over others. That is significantly part of the hierarchical top-down type of species, which is what they are through the centuries. Okay, so I also want to bring up the fact that we generate scalar waves, that it's why they don't want us to be together in any groupings, etc. It's why they want to cover our faces with masks so that we don't communicate. It's why they have censorship. It's why they want to control us in every way, shape, and form. It's why they torture us, etc. All of this is a reptilian agenda, and it is a dominating another species type agenda. It's important to know that the more you know, the more your knowledge of good and evil allows you to know your enemy, the more equipped you are to fight and and basically take over, fight and take control of the planet away, and become sovereign away from the domination of this species. Earth is being challenged at this time, humans on Earth and Earth herself, with this takeover agenda. So it's important to realize that we have the tools within our genome, in our physical bodies and in our capabilities, having to do with psychic abilities, etc., and multiple types of psychic abilities, including being able to generate scalar waves to send them back at the individuals who are trying to target you, take control of you, etc., etc. You have every ability to reverse that and to take the energy and send it right back at the person or beings who are sending it at you. So directing energy, we ourselves, humans, have the ability to direct energy. And I've said many times, but I'll say it again here. Duncan O'Finian went out to Cambodia, I believe it was, with a group of children. They were told they were highly psychic children. They were told to hold hands. They got into a big circle. I forget how many children, something maybe 12 or more. And they basically generated a scalar wave and decimated an entire village of supposedly, the enemy. So this is, again, a demonstration of how powerful we really are. If you look into the Vril materials, you'll also see that these abilities are all part of our genome. The ability to do things that are, again, like Christ was able to do, whether it be fly, walk on water, turn water into wine and back again, et cetera, et cetera. These are our unexplored abilities. And through the way it works with the universe a lot, again, with evil or negativity serving good, is that the more pressure you have to either live or die based on your ability to overcome an obstacle, the more you learn and the more you become a master of your vehicle and what it means to be human. So these are the challenges before us. I want to encourage everyone to work on, if you want to fight the enemy and you want humans to survive, then you need to develop your own psi abilities, and everyone has them, as well as your special gifts that might help us in untold ways. So thank you again for watching, and take care. Bye-bye.